could the regime actually go nuclear? Has it removed the 60% enriched uranium to a safe place where some secret program has centrifuges to complete the job to create maybe just one or two nuclear weapons, um, uh, which would kind of leave Iran in a North Korea type state where it would be a pariah.
I'm joined today by the Times' Richard Spencer. Thanks for talking to me.
Hello.
Can you briefly describe just what's happened between Iran and Israel in the last 5 or so days and just how we've reached this point?
So this has to be set in the context of the American negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program. It's so the whole issue goes back decades, and the quandary of the West in how to deal with Iran's nuclear program, which Iran says is not intended to build a nuclear weapon, but which certainly has the capability of creating a nuclear weapon. So there have been many backwards and forwards negotiations over that. There was the nuclear deal in 2015, which President Trump tore up effectively in 2018 in his first term in office. Slightly unexpectedly to people who remembered that, he came back into office at the beginning of the year saying he was going to do a deal with Iran. He'd been very scathing of Obama's deal with Iran. He reckoned he could do better. So he launched these negotiations. These negotiations were ongoing. There were sort of deadlines put in about it, but there was an expectation that those negotiations would carry on the American side. So certainly that's what they were saying, that there was supposed to be a meeting on Sunday. But they were preempted by Israel, who decided to launch these massive attacks on Iran in the early hours of Friday morning, which have gone on ever since, taking out key bits not only of the nuclear infrastructure of Iran, nuclear facilities, but also other military targets and civilian targets that you could call sort of quasi-military, like the homes of nuclear scientists who were. Several of whom, possibly 10 or even more, have been killed, Iran's nuclear scientists. Then, in retaliation for that, Iran has fired off missiles at Israel, most of which have been intercepted. Israel has good defense capabilities. It has its Iron Dome missile shield, but some of which have got through, and a number of Israeli civilians have also been killed. So that's where we are. There are a couple of big questions. One is whether Israel actually has the capability to finish off Iran's nuclear program, if you like. Another one is whether America will get directly involved, whether it will join the attacks on Iran, or whether, at the other extreme, it will force Israel to stop so that President Trump's negotiations can continue. President Trump, as you might imagine, has sort of given hints in all directions simultaneously, but he certainly says that he can still do a deal. The trouble for America, which is also trouble for Iran, if you like, is that the deal he is offering Iran is one that they have always said they will not accept, which is to give up the right to enriched uranium, which can have civilian uses as well as military uses. Whether those negotiations are really a viable prospect now is very much open to question.
So just getting, I suppose, right to the heart of it, do you think this could be the end of the regime in Iran?
My feeling is no. My feeling is that the history of aerial action alone to bring about regime change is very scarce. I mean, there's one occasion I can think of, which was that when the West intervened, particularly America and Britain, in the Yugoslav civil war. It intervened twice, over Bosnia and then later over Kosovo. And the second intervention over Kosovo, where Serbia was eventually forced to withdraw forces from Kosovo, and that was followed not long after by the overthrow of Milosevic, the leader of Serbia, stroke the rump state of Yugoslavia. I don't think that those conditions are there in Iran. I don't think there is a domestic political force that can take on the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime itself has shown itself perfectly willing to use force to put down protests, most recently in 2022 with the woman life freedom protests, but all the way back to 2009 when there was a serious threat to the regime, when a lot of people disputed the victory of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in that year's presidential election. Or there was a serious threat to him anyway, perhaps not the regime itself, but they were very happy to use force to put down those protests. I don't think their ability to put down protests is damaged in any way by the Israeli attacks. And there is no real alternative to the regime. The noisiest opposition groups are both based abroad. One a gathering around the Crown Prince, the son of the last Shah, and one around a group calling itself the National Council for Resistance in Iran, but that's based around a rather shadowy and strange ideological organization called the Mujahideen al-Haq, which was originally a sort of Marxist Islamist organization, very redolent of some of the strange factions of the 1970s, and it has supporters inside Iran. Probably so does the royal family, but there's no sign that either of those have enough support inside Iran to actually sort of organize the fall of the regime. So my impression is that we're talking about degrading the regime, not replacing it.
Netanyahu's essentially he's come out quite openly saying that he's looking for the people of Iran to rise up, essentially, and not quite stated that toppling the regime was his war goal, stating that clearly, but he has made no bones about the fact that that would be a quite a nice bonus of the initial war goal of removing Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities. So how do you see him reconciling that now that he has put that out there for the public?
Yeah, I think the way the Israelis have talked about this issue of regime change is quite interesting, and I think merits at some point a full forensic analysis of exactly what's been said, when and where, and to whom. My impression so far is that there are two messages being given out, one internally and one externally. Now they're not foolish enough to make those totally incompatible. But internally, the messaging is very strongly that regime change is not the goal of this operation. That the goal of the operation is to destroy nuclear and missile sites. And that's all you need to do with Israel. I mean, there's a lot of support for that. Those twin capabilities of Iran are existential threats to Israel. Certainly, they are a very strong threat to the Israeli people, and so there's a lot of support for Netanyahu just to limit himself to that goal. And that's certainly if you ask officials outright, they would say, "What is the goal of the regime of the action?" It is that, they do say, well, if the regime fell, no one would be complaining. But the message of rise up and overthrow the regime is, that quote that you referenced there from Netanyahu, that was an English language quote given in a address directly to the Iranian people by video. It wasn't internally directed towards the Israeli people. And when he's talked about the virtues of regime change, he's done it on American television channels. And I think, this is slightly speculative, but I think his target audience there is actually America, really. He has a strong support base amongst a faction of the Republican right that still believes in regime change as a principle, as they did in Iraq, so they did in Iran. That's obviously a much more controversial issue in America. But Israel is keen to bolster that narrative as part of bolstering support for Netanyahu and the attack on Iran inside America. If you can say that there is a political objective here, that strengthens the narrative in American media and American discussion, which is very important to Netanyahu and to Israel, obviously. I talked about the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. He's in America. He's very present in the last couple of years on the on the on what you might call the commentary circuit, with backed by pro-Israel think tanks, giving talks to pro-Israel groups. So Netanyahu is slotting his discourse into that narrative of regime change. And of course, one final thing to say on this is that it does keep Netanyahu's area of ambiguity open, which is very important to Israel, to Netanyahu, to military strategy in general. What is the end game for Netanyahu? Who's never quite clear. Is he actually going to try and himself, or Israel on its own, dismantle the entire Iranian nuclear program? That's a very big ask. A lot of it is buried deep in the mountains at a place called Fordo, the second nuclear site. A lot of the conventional thinking is that it would actually take an American bunker buster bomb to destroy that. Can he persuade Trump to do that for him? If he's going to persuade Trump to do that, does he actually want to say, well, your bonus for 10 is take out the regime as well, because that would be part of an overarching American strategy that isn't just sort of filling in the Israeli gap, if you like, but it also gives an endpoint for Israeli strategy, because if Netanyahu doesn't take out Fordo, doesn't take out the whole nuclear program, then where does that leave the war? Well, was it all worthwhile? Well, if you think that the aim is to undermine the regime, lead to a regime collapse in the next year or two, then that leaves things a bit more open and doesn't look like a failure if you don't manage to finish off the nuclear program.
So if Netanyahu has sort of put this concept of regime change out there to sort of win American support, I'm struggling to reconcile why then Trump has reportedly vetoed the reported Israeli plan to assassinate Ali Khamenei.
Yeah. So again, there's a lot going on there, right? So the first thing to remember is that Trump is not an administration. The Trump administration is not a conventional administration. It's not like Obama or even Bush, where you've got very clear goals. You have a very clear set of policy advisors in those key national security positions that you can use to interpret what the aim of American policy is. Trump is surrounded by two completely different MAGA factions, if you like. You have the MAGA faction that wants conventional military power to be strengthened and exploited and used around the world even more than before, including in support of Israel. That would, parts of which would probably like to see regime change in Iran and wouldn't mind America being part of that. Then you also have the isolationist MAGA wing that says that America shouldn't be involved in all these wars, shouldn't be wasting its resources in the Middle East. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who's the director of national security, who's specifically warned against this sort of aggressive activity by Israel, said recently that there was no reason to suppose that Iran was involved, at the point of making a nuclear weapon. So you have these two competing wings, and Netanyahu is clearly, pitching to the interventionist wing of the Trump administration, and Trump himself blows hot and cold on this, because although he says he wants to end the foreign wars, so much of his actual involvement in the Middle East in his first term and to date has seen those wars intensify and very much in Israel's favor. On the specific issue of did Israel really think it could kill Khamenei? Did it really go to America and say, "Do you want us to do this?" And did Trump say, "No, no, no, you can't"? I mean, there's been so much disinformation around this whole issue of, how much Trump is cracking the whip over Netanyahu and restraining him. That is, we have to regard these stories with some caution. I mean, I'm not saying it didn't happen in some form, but whether um, how seriously to take both those ideas: one, that Israel had Khamenei in its sights, and two, that it went to Trump for approval. Let's hold off. I mean, Trump himself has indicated, and Israeli officials have said, that the whole narrative about Trump restraining Israel from attacking Iran, which was what we were being told a couple of weeks ago, that Trump had told Netanyahu not to attack Iran, and Netanyahu had said, "Yeah, fair cop, gov. Of course, I won't do that if you say not." Was part of the deception tactics to confuse Iran and make it less prepared for what actually happened on Friday. So, we have to be quite cautious with some of these narratives.
So why then do you think Israel has chosen this time to strike Iran? Like you say, if America's Tulsi Gabbard has shown reports that they were not considering building a bomb at this time.
So there's two things, two very clear answers to that. Why now? So having said what I said about Tulsi Gabbard and about the ambiguities over Iran's nuclear program, whether it was intended to build a weapon or not, there's no doubt that Iran's nuclear program in toto was advancing very fast. It has now enriched a lot of uranium to 60% purity. You need 90% purity for an atomic weapon, a nuclear weapon. That last 30% is not very hard to do. The experts, and I don't think there's much doubt about this, say that Iran had enough of that 60% enriched uranium to make 9 bombs worth of uranium very quickly, days, certainly no more than weeks. It has ballistic missiles that could deliver them. How ready it was actually to weaponize those, it's quite difficult to turn even metallic enriched uranium into a warhead. What isn't quite clear, but it was certainly developing the capabilities. On the other hand, Israel has been warning for decades, and other experts, that Iran could break out to a bomb pretty quickly within months. Maybe that time frame was coming down a bit, from, as I say, months to weeks. Why now then? Well, the second reason is a very simple one, that it had the opportunity. It was always questioned until 18 months ago whether Israel would dare to attack Iran's nuclear facilities on its own without America getting involved. The dangers of Iranian defenses taking out Israeli planes that were trying to do that was too great. The dangers of retaliation on Israel were too great, from both directly from Iranian missile sites, but most particularly from proxy militias, particularly Hezbollah, which has a massive missile force on the northern border in Lebanon. And the reaction, the possible reaction whereby Iran might hit Western interests, say, US bases, Western bases in the Gulf. That's all changed in the last 18 months. The Hezbollah has been defanged. Israel last August and September, as part of the war on Gaza, which Hezbollah sort of joined in a rather sort of strangely half-hearted fashion in retrospect, led to this massive wave of Israeli attacks on Hezbollah in the late summer, which destroyed the entire Hezbollah top leadership, destroyed huge amounts of their missile supplies, completely took out Hezbollah as an active force on that front for the time being. Then a previous round of to and fro exchanges with Iran in October really showed Iran's weakness, because Israel was able to take out virtually all of Iran's missile defenses, um, while sustaining very little damage in return. So suddenly Iran was left exposed. Its retaliation capacity via its proxy militias had been massively weakened. Its defenses had been exposed as hollow. Um, uh, if ever there was a time Israel could act, it was now, and that, I think, clearly has been why the whole mood towards an Israeli attack changed since October.
So, short of trying to, as you say, trying to predict Netanyahu's somewhat nebulous war goals, what does the end of this most recent episode of conflict look like for Iran? You mentioned something about diminishment of the regime, but not the full removal or toppling.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, as you say, Netanyahu's left options open, as any war leader would. The outside chances, from my point of view, the outside chances is that in the next week or 10 days, Iran says, okay, we'll come back to the negotiating table. Maybe not surrender immediately, but offer a deal that is much more acceptable to at least to Trump, which he will then enforce it on Israel in some form. That's one possibility, and that would, of course, leave the regime then pretty much in place. Possibly lead to a wider deal with America. Who knows? Which would, ultimately could, see sanctions being reduced and Israel becoming more prosperous and strengthening the regime. That's one possibility. The other possibility, I think that's unlikely, as you can probably tell. Let's say there is the possibility that America will be drawn into the war in some form or another. Either Trump will decide to help Iran go after the last nuclear facility, and one possibility then is that Iran would hit back by attacking American bases in the Gulf, which would lead to a fairly catastrophic result for the regime, which might indeed trigger an American attempt to change the regime in Iran. I suspect not, but it would be a very bloody experience for Iran if it tried that. But again, I think that Trump will say no to that. I'm not entirely sure how much Israel really wants that. It says it wants that, but if you talk to officials, they say they want that. I think they must be a little bit nervous about the prospect of total escalation of this conflict. I think what they will do, and I was listening to a Israeli military strategist talking about this yesterday. They now have air superiority over Iran, complete freedom of movement. I think they will carry on banging away at the nuclear program. I think they will probably fail to eliminate it completely, but I think they will get to the point in the next few weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, where they can declare victory, where they can say we've done so much damage to the nuclear program and all the rest. It's not just the actual physical program itself; it's the people operating at the Revolutionary Guards, the scientists, and so on. That it will take years for Iran to rebuild that program, and it may not even have the capacity ever to get back to where it was. It can declare victory, and at that point, Iran is left with that puts the onus back on the Ayatollah, puts the on Ayatollah Khamenei to say what is his vision for the future of the Islamic Republic. He's now 86. Does he want his legacy to be a Iran that is so obsessed with rebuilding its nuclear program, even after all this damage has been done, that he's going to put more of Iran's, not very great resources, more of its oil money into rebuilding that program? Or is he effectively going to, maybe not admit defeat in the sense of, coming out with his hands up, but say, okay, whatever's for the future is for the future. It's for my successors to do. I'm going to try and just, restore some confidence in the regime's ability to provide a safe and prosperous environment for its people. But that would leave a regime very weakened because, one of the core ideological forms of legitimacy for the regime is its resistance to Israel. So how much is it going to continue the resistance to Israel? It'll be in a weaker position to do so, and the regime itself will have lost in the medium to longer term a fair amount of credibility through this whole episode. And then you start having to look as to what the other factors in the regime, the potential successors to Khamenei as supreme leader, other power bases like the Revolutionary Guard, the clerics, what they want as well. The Revolutionary Guard, its purpose is to take on Israel, but it's lost so much of its leadership; it must be in some disarray as well.
Brought me to one of my potentially my last question, which is what place does Iran have following this conflict? As you say, it will be the regime will be weakened and have to reassert its control on the population, which is widely known as not a fan of the regime, but also in a context of having most of its regional neighbors sort of somewhat in displeasure of its warmongering, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, I think one possibility we haven't really discussed is the nuclear option. There is this possibility, and people much more expert than I disagree about the technical aspects of it. Could the regime actually go nuclear? Could it has it removed the 60% enriched uranium to a safe place where some secret program has centrifuges to complete the job to create maybe just one or two nuclear weapons, um, uh, which would kind of leave Iran in a North Korea type state where it would be a pariah. There would be a risk of other countries like Saudi Arabia deciding to go nuclear as well. Again, I'm more of the view that that won't happen. That a decline is the end state. In that case, the Gulf states are strengthened. They're no longer afraid of Iran. They've had a rather nice position to be in, where they can condemn the attacks on Iran, which are unpopular for most people in the Middle East. Makes those regimes in Saudi Arabia and the UAE um, uh, look as if they're acting internationally in line with what their people want for a change. Condemning it, but also at the same time, thinking, well, that's one threat to our stability, which is um, Iranian activity that has been reduced and even removed. Whether that leads in a direction that Israel wants in terms of more, countries recognizing Israel, I'm not sure, but it certainly leaves those states feeling a bit more secure and a bit more confident. Um, and for Iran, it leaves in a sort of Venezuela position where it's a slightly chaotic country. It survives because it can still sell its oil to countries like China that are prepared to buy it. Um, it's not very popular, but no one really wants to see civil war or an American invasion. So just to sort of carries on in a much weakened position. Uh, until somehow it managed to rebuild itself in some way. I mean, there are various means by which Iran could rebuild itself in the long term. But one thing although Iran is always, proud to think of itself as a great historical power with, long-term strategies and an ability to make its people suffer, if you like, for the greater, longer term cause. One thing it's always failed to do is actually develop a long term strategy to be powerful enough to take on Israel. I mean, it thought it had one with this militia strategy of proxy militias around the region, but that did rather tumble like a pack of cards last year. And actually, as Israel itself has shown, there is no substitute if you want to be a regional power of any sort anywhere in the world. There's no real alternative other than to build your economy, make sure you have good weapons, good armed forces, and can take the fight to the enemy successfully yourself.